know you don't like them. You know you don't like them.
I don't think. Just don't.
No, it's fine.
No, so what I'll do is I'll just zoom in on the podium with different steps.
Here we go. There you are.
Say bold motion on this position. Up to that.
Oh, well, we know it's not getting up.
Oh, but it still starts the conversation. Yeah, conversation. I can't even have one.
Hey, it's the rebel round back here, mate. So
Yeah, I want to be throwing barbs.
have a loud voice.
Are you asking a question?
Smart five, yeah. Gold Thompsons.
It's not a territory, man. What are you going to do about the Boston?
I'm not sure.
We need to kick off now, guys. Good evening and welcome to the Bean Federal Election Forum, hosted by the Western Creek Community Council, Tuggeranong Community Council and Molonglo Valley Community Forum. I'm Monique Brower and I'm the co-convener of the Molonglo Valley Community Forum, and I'm delighted to be your chair for this evening. I would like to invite ACT Greens Senate candidate, Dr. Janara Goring to provide the acknowledgement of country.
You can hear me all, yeah? Yamaway winya, yamaway winya, yamaway winya, yamaway win. Yamaway winya, yamaway winya, yamaway winya, yamaway win. Yamaway winya, yamaway win. When we do acknowledgements or welcomes to country on our country, we do it quite differently to the way it's done these days in the modern context. We sing to each other when we come to the edge of our country, and we sing a song to say, "Can I come in?" And they sing back and say, "Yes, you can come in." So today I'm singing a song from my country to the Ngunnawal people of this place to let them know that I'm here and where I come from. And to thank you all for being here, and to thank them for taking care of this country for thousands and thousands of years so that we all have the benefit of living on it now. So thank you to the Ngunnawal ancestors and the Ngunnawal elders who are here taking care of country, and all their families and children who are palya.
Thank you, Janara. On the 21st of May, we head to the polls to vote for our representative for the next 3 years. Tonight we will hear from candidates for the 2 Senate positions and the House of Representatives federal seat for Bean. Bean covers all the southern parts of the ACT. Some of the southern suburbs of Canberra, specifically Bean, includes Tuggeranong, Weston Creek, Molonglo Valley districts, and the Wodonga Valley suburbs of Farrer, Isaacs, Pearce, Mawson and Phillip. Bean also covers Norfolk Island. We'll shortly open the floor to questions. We ask that questions be relevant to the jurisdiction of the federal candidates and to the seat of Bean. Please wait for my invitation before you ask a question. We have microphones in place. We have roaming mics for accessibility, and we also have a mic to the side here that you may stand up and ask your question at. If you need a mic brought to you, just please raise your hand. Please keep your questions concise and limited to one question at a time. We ask that all questions and responses be respectful. As we only have a short time together, I may at times politely stop you. So please be understanding as we hope to give everyone an opportunity to speak. To kick off the forum, I'll provide a quick introduction of each candidate and invite them to speak in no particular order. I will give each candidate 2 minutes, timed, to tell us their 3 top priorities for these. So to kick us off this evening, David Smith, MP, was elected to the House of Representatives as the federal member of the new seat of Bean in 2019, representing the Labor Party. This followed a brief period of service in the Senate. Before entering Parliament, he held several roles within the public and community sector, including the Labor movement with Professionals Australia and the Australian Federal Police Association. Please welcome David Smith to give his 2 minutes.
Thanks, Monique, and I'd like to begin by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on and pay my respect to their elders past and present. I'd further like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Island people here with us tonight. It's been a singular privilege of my life to serve as your federal representative for the past 3 years, and with your support, hopefully I will continue to serve you and our community. I've lived in Bean nearly all my entire life. I went to school here, my first jobs were here, and I'm pleased to be raising my family here. Being local matters. Over the last 2 years, working with local community groups, we've been able to deliver nearly $500,000 worth of projects, partnering with 60 organisations, community service groups, local sporting clubs, and other organisations that bring people together. And today I was very happy to announce the now Albanese Labor government would provide $800,000 to Weston Creek Tennis Club for new and upgraded courts. It's a great example of how an ACT Labor government could work with a potential federal Labor government. But of course, this is a national campaign. When you enter the voting booth, you'll be thinking about whether our country is on the right track. Let me be clear, our country is not on the right track, but we have an opportunity to fix that. Many of our nation's priorities are also priorities for Bean. So the 3 priorities for me are restoring integrity to government, including a National Anti-Corruption Commission, taking real climate action by slashing emissions and spurring on $76 billion worth of investment in renewable energy, and dealing with cost of living pressures, making childcare cheaper, making sure that wages start growing again, and also looking at pay increases for our aged care workers and making housing more affordable. Our team is ready for government, but that's enough for me. I know it's close to 2 minutes. I want to talk to you to hear about what's important for you.
Thank you, David, for keeping to time. Okay, I need to stop that. The next candidate I'll invite to speak is Catherine Savary. She's the Greens candidate for Bean. Catherine is an accountant, artist and small business owner. She's a Weston Creek local and the former treasurer of the ACT Greens. Catherine is an experienced commercial accountant in small, medium and large organisations across various industries. Please welcome Catherine.
Hello everyone, nice to see so many people here. I don't really want to talk about myself. I think I have been given an introduction. I am an accountant and artist, but what's more important to me is what's happening at this election. I feel like this is a real turning point. What happens at this election will affect the rest of, the planet and Australia. So it's really important who we vote for. My 3 priorities are climate change. I suppose you would expect that from the Greens, but we just have not seen enough action on that. So we need to get to zero emissions very quickly. We need to phase out coal, gas and oil, And we need to build infrastructure for renewables, and we need to create new jobs so there's a just transition for the current coal miners and other people that work in those industries. The other thing we do need, and look, I think some of us, many of us here tonight agree on all these things, but we do need integrity in politics. And what that means really is we want to know who's donating to the parties. We need to have a better system for federal politics where it's not a year after an election where people say who donated. And the reason it matters who donates is that we don't want favours for donations. In the Greens, and as I have been a treasurer, I know that it's all individual people who want to just help us make a difference. We don't splash out lots of money on our campaigns. We don't have the money to do that. But we believe in people, and we want communities to come together and discuss issues, and we also want, I believe, a multi-partisan approach. I don't think the current approach we have in politics is working, so I think we want more collaboration from groups like this, community councils and other groups, to make decisions about where we go. I know this is not an understatement. There is a problem with planning. And planning is not just local, but also across Australia. So part of that integrity in politics is improving a planning process that also includes environmental issues, social issues, and is not just for profit. The third thing is really about cost of living. Sorry. Cost of living, but anyway, I'll finish there.
Thank you. Thanks, Catherine. I apologise, I am a meeting timekeeper. I like to give people 2 minutes and be fair. So the next candidate I'll invite to speak is the Liberal candidate for Bean, Jane Hyatt. Jane is a former small business owner, educator, Navy veteran and mother of 4. As a resident of Canberra South for over 30 years, Jane has been an active community member. Jane has held board positions for educational and community organisations. Please welcome Jane.
Move that, you can hear me okay. Hi everyone, thank you very much for the kind intro there. So yes, I'm your Liberal candidate for your seat, the seat of Bean. Now when you asked for me to pick 3 top priorities, I looked at that from a personal perspective. It's difficult for me to choose because I see myself as a problem solver, and when I see a problem, I want to solve it. So nonetheless, what I've done is put together 3 of these priorities for you. So as you mentioned, I'm a mum of 4 kids. I've been married for 31 years. I've always been engaged in and around my children's education and after-school activities, and I now proudly see them in vastly different areas of life, namely the public service for child 1, the private sector for child 2, creative and off-the-grid for child 3, and a small business owner in the trade sector for child 4. So I'm keen to support families in their own quest to see their children through to adulthood with opportunities to provide for the next generation. But like many of you, I'm passionate to see families live and thrive in Canberra and not leave Canberra. Our policy around the cost of living and housing affordability works well to see this realised. Now, you also mentioned I'm a Navy veteran. I'm also an active volunteer in the disaster relief space. I'm resolute to see real and meaningful monetary, in-kind and physical support continue to flow in a timely, organised and professional manner to any and all communities, including ours, who are badly impacted by climate disasters, but more importantly, to mitigate the adverse impacts through resilience programs such as the Australian Resilience Corps. I belong to Disaster Relief Australia, and we are on the ground our motto is getting shit done and don't muck about. So I've just come back from Corripi, having been up there for a week helping to clean out flooded homes. This is real stuff. People are hurting terribly. And lastly for tonight, as a small business owner of 30 years in Tuggeranong, I'm keenly aware of the enormous pressures small to medium business are under in normal times, let alone COVID times. My interest in seeing all Canberra businesses in Bean prosper and flourish is a top priority for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. The next speaker I would like to come forward is Dr. Janara Goring, who is the Greens candidate for the ACT Senate. Janara is a Waka Waka Wulu Wulu traditional owner from central Queensland and was born in Outback at Longreach. Janara is an academic, teacher and researcher, a unionist, a former public servant and a proud grandmother. Please welcome Janara again.
Palya, it's nice to have an introduction that just covers about everything. So, because most of you don't know me, I thought I'd give some background to me in my 2 minutes. But firstly, let me tell you what my 3 priorities are. Free dental into Medicare. So free Medicare, free health services for all Australians. Free tertiary education and free public and private education from zero, from kindergarten, preschool, right through to tertiary. And thirdly, and most importantly I feel, is the First Nations Truth Treaty Voice policy that the Greens have, which also aligns with putting First Nations knowledge into the climate change, climate action agenda. So let me tell you a bit about myself. I grew up in outback Queensland, as Monique said, on a large cattle and sheep property. I had a Catholic education for 12 years, 5 of them at boarding school. That was because my father worked 2 jobs, as did my mother, to send my 6 siblings and I to boarding school for 5 years each from Weston, Queensland. My father went to the shearers' strikes that started the ALP in outback Queensland. My mother had a strong Waka Waka and Woolly Woolly cultural tradition because she grew up with her grandfather, who was the first man to see, Waka Waka man, to see white people come to our country. I got my first degree under the Whitlam government's free tertiary education program, and as a senior public servant and an academic, I've continued my postgraduate degree work in community development, business administration, and now a PhD in sacred leadership because I wanted to learn a lot and serve in the 2 worlds of both cultures. My life and my career has been about that. I teach at university. I've taught medical doctors, teachers in training and nurses about how to work with First Nations people of the next 2 and 3 generations of children. I think politics is very personal. It's very important. We need integrity in our political agenda. We need people who are going to be moral and honest. We need people who don't behave badly on Capitol Hill. So my agenda is to do those 3 things, but also to bring integrity and working together in collaboration and unity as part of my record in the Senate. Thank you for listening. Palya.
Thank you, Janara. David Pocock is an independent candidate for the Senate. David migrated from Zimbabwe as a teenager and went on to captain the Wallabies and vice-captain the Brumbies during his rugby career. David is involved in multiple businesses and has co-founded numerous not-for-profit community initiatives in Australia and overseas. Please welcome David to the stage.
Evening, and thank you for this opportunity. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are in an Ngunnawal country. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. The 3 things that I would like to see based on talking to the community, so let me know if I'm on track after this. Firstly, we need to be getting our fair share of infrastructure funding here in the ACT. In the last budget, we saw just 0.3% of infrastructure spending coming to the ACT. We're now 1.7% of Australia's population, and there's been a severe underinvestment over the last decade. We have to turn that around. We've seen here in Canberra, we've arguably got the slowest internet speeds in the country, and looking at NBN data, we're getting neglected when it comes to NBN upgrades. We need to ensure that Canberra is getting its fair share and that we have someone in there pushing for that to happen. People in Canberra obviously want to see an end to the pork barrelling that we're seeing. It's not working for us as a safe area. We're not getting the same attention that they're getting just across the border here to Monaro. That shouldn't be the way. And I guess that leads into the next thing that I'm hearing is that we want more integrity in politics. We want an integrity commission. We want our politicians held to the same standard we expect of ourselves in so many of our workplaces. And I think it's really important that that happens in the first year of whoever forms the next government, and I'd be pushing for that to happen. I think that would include transparency around political donations, and thirdly, the cost of living challenge is real. We are the most expensive city to rent in now, second most expensive to buy in. We need real, meaningful plans to deal with this, both in terms of housing affordability and cost of living pressures. We need to be looking at childcare, reviewing our social safety nets to ensure that people aren't having to live in poverty in our communities, and also looking at bulk billing statistics here in the ACT and access to specialists. This is something that gets raised a lot. We need to ensure that people can get the medical care they need here in Canberra and not have to drive 350 k's to Sydney to see a specialist. Thank you.
Thank you, David. The next candidate is Therese Faulkner, who is the Australian Progressives candidate for the Senate. Therese is a former public servant, current international development specialist and an active member of the Canberra community. She's an experienced professional in international development and diplomacy. Therese is also president of the Australian Progressives. Please welcome Therese.
Thanks very much, Monique. The Australian Progressives, we're about progress to the future, and we're here for the long haul. We've already contested several elections, and I was a candidate for the seat of Bean in the last federal election. The Australian Progressives are about progress to the future with a set of values underpinning that progress, and those values include fundamentals such as ethics, empathy and equality. So having a think about the three highest priorities for the residents of Bean, we think they probably align well with our party platform. So number one is about long-term planning, number two is about resourcing and respecting the public service, and number three is about addressing what I kind of like to call the political emergency in Australia. So on long-term planning, we see far too much waste and mismanagement in the knee-jerk sort of politics that ensure major parties stay in favour and stay in power. But let's plan for 100 years. Let's not plan for just the next 3-year election cycle. So that way we can actually address things like housing and affordable housing, urban planning, transport solutions, infrastructure, not to mention climate and environment. On public service, so the public service has a key role in ensuring integrity and transparency, and it plays a key role in delivering government policy and government services, and it's been eroded. So let's restore what this amazing national asset brings to the people of Bean and to Australia. Speaking of Bean, we've had several government departments located in Tuggeranong, and that has brought vibrancy and economic stimulus to that part of Canberra, and I think that should be maintained and increased. And then on addressing the political emergency, a few other speakers have talked about this, but we need to stop that slippery slide into corruption. There have been a number of questionable grants programs, rorts, etc. And Australia has dropped to an all-time low on the Global Corruption Index, and there's a lack of trust and integrity in politics. Let's get rid of big political donations and increase transparency. Thank you.
Thank you, Therese. And the last candidate we have to speak for the 2 minutes with the priority. Oh, two, sorry. I've said last and I've got 2 left. I've missed one. Who wants to be the last? No. Let's keep going. Kim Rubenstein is an independent candidate for the Senate. Kim is the law professor, author, human rights advocate and mum. Kim has had an extensive career as an academic specialising in constitutional and administrative law, migration law and citizenship law. Please welcome Kim, the second last candidate to speak.
Thank you, Monique, and thank you to the Tuggeranong Community Council, Weston Creek Community Council and the Molonglo Valley Community Forum. The work that you do representing your community is an inspiration to all of us. Your volunteerism and your dedication to representing your community is what I want to take into Parliament
to directly represent the people of Bean and the people of Canberra and Norfolk Island in all that I do. My highest priority is to directly represent you and stand up for Canberrans. This time last week I was on my way back from Norfolk Island, which is in the jurisdiction of Bean and the ACT. And what I wanted to do there is what I want to do for all of the people that I will represent, which is stand up for all of us in Parliament. So firstly, that is by having drafted already a bill to double the number of senators for the ACT so that you are represented in an appropriate way in our parliamentary system. That will ensure that we will be able to directly connect with the needs both in our housing needs, health and education and beyond. So that's my first priority. The second priority, having spoken and engaged and talked for 25 years about integrity in government, both teaching my students about the liberal democratic frameworks that are fundamental to ensuring that our representatives are aware that they need to be transparent and accountable to the people. Over successive years, they have been so eroded that we are now in desperate need for an independent commission against corruption. I will support that, but I will support that with the aim of that being a safety net, because we need to restore those essential structures to make sure that all of us who take on this responsibility know that we have a duty to be transparent and accountable to the people that we serve. Finally, my third priority, which is a priority for all humankind, is climate action. And I encourage you to have a look at my website for the initiative that I've proposed, which is not just talking about climate action, but a way forward with a clear direction, a climate compact that I will be able to share with you ladies this evening if the time allows. Thank you.
And now's the last candidate for real this time. So Dr. Jamie Christie is an independent candidate for Bean. Jamie is an emergency doctor and has worked in medical jobs across Canberra Public Hospital as a senior specialist in emergency departments and as a director of training for both junior and specialist doctors. So you're definitely the candidate for Bean, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, that's good. I'm just making sure. It's out of order because I've done all the candidates for Bean already.
And then here we are.
Yeah, we're back again. We're back again to Bean.
Actual independence.
Yeah. Please welcome Jamie.
Monique, thank you for accommodating me at relatively short notice. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand and welcome their emerging leaders and acknowledging the past. My three priorities for Being real action on climate change, integrity in politics, and then affordable housing. There are, as Jane said, multiple other problems that one might choose to focus on. I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about integrity. As I'm an independent candidate and I'm running in the House of Reps, then I'm standing against Dave, Jane and Catherine. These three people are all representing parties, but I'm standing as independent, so I'm not a party, so what you're getting is me. I'd suggest that integrity is doing the right thing rather than what you think you can get away with. And I would suggest that integrity also involves some truth-telling. I was motivated to stand the first time I stood in 2019 on January 8th when our Deputy Prime Minister advised that the mini fish kill was just Australia and we needed to get used to it. I, much to my surprise, scored 8.4% of the primary. I was overwhelmed with what I saw as the series of problems that we are currently facing and almost didn't stand this time. I stood because a number of people suggested that I should, and because I concluded that if we want participatory democracy, then someone has to participate. Last time I was outraged, this time I'm disappointed. The Labor Party, authorised by Dave Smith, posted out this handy how to vote hand thing. So did the Liberal Party. Theirs wasn't actually authorised on the outside. In this time of reducing trust in our institutions, for both parties to attempt to politicise this in this way, I find disappointing. The Electoral Commissioner had presumably not approved it since he is on record as advising people who believe it's data harvesting and they shouldn't comply. I'm disappointed with our current federal government and its understandings about corruption. The Liberal Party has pleaded in court that it has no obligation not to mislead or attempt to disturb not to tell the truth to the electors. This was in Josh Frydenberg's case arising out of the Tuggeranong cornflakes. And they have pleaded as the Commonwealth Government under Susan Lee that they have no responsibility to look after the well-being of our children. I'm disappointed that I don't understand why a person of your integrity and community service can stand up to support that group. I support many of the ideals of the Greens. I think it is extremely unlikely in this relatively polarised and diverse electorate that the Greens will be able to get in. The only possibility for change in this electorate is for my vote to get over the Green vote and for the disenfranchised Liberals, the disappointed Labor people. What is the point of the Labor Party if they don't stand for progressive taxation? Why am I getting a tax cut? But we cannot, because it's legislated and isn't due to enact in 2040. It's bananas. Thank you. I would be happy to talk to any other questions.
Thank you to all the candidates. So we're going to open up for questions now. If you have a question, please raise your hand or come up to the mic. Does anybody want to kick it off? If not, we've got one here. Can we take this one here for me, please?
Thank you very much, candidates. That will be good. Look, I'm worried about climate change. I think it's become a local issue now. I'm shading you. I think it's become a local issue since the Black Summer fire. So more than national and global, we've done some 2019 with all the fires. Thank you. The Australian Financial Review recently wrote that Australia's carbon policy is little more than selling coal until someone makes us stop. What are the candidates' policies on the export of fossil fuels? Thank you.
There we go.
I mean, I think this climate speaks to one of the big frustrations with politics over the last decade is something that should be about different ideas of how to head in the same direction has been politicised. We haven't seen action. We've been left behind as a country, and we're now in a situation where neither of the major parties' emissions reduction target by 2030 is as ambitious as the Business Council of Australia. I think that says a lot about the opportunity that we're actually missing in terms of not only just dealing with climate, but building an economy for the future, taking advantage of the incredible renewable resources we have here. We clearly need something to break this deadlock. I really believe Zali Steggall's climate bill can do that. It's got broad backing from the community, from the business community. It's a 60% by 2030. The thing that I'm really interested in them pushing is how do we speed up this transition in a way where households benefit. There are significant cost savings if we can get the right policy so that households are saving money on their energy bills. We can't just leave that to the market. We need to be ensuring that we are setting up the big picture policy for the generation side of things, but then at a household level actually helping households electrify. So do what we've done for rooftop solar. We've got to do that for batteries, for heat pumps, for first cycle air conditioners and for EVs. That's the challenge and that's the opportunity. So I think we need to be telling a more hopeful, bigger story that really invites people in. And there's huge opportunities for the regions as well, and it's good to see at least one of the parties now actually focusing on investing. Actually both of them are focusing on investing in the regions.
We are against, the Greens are against the export of fossil fuels. To the gentleman who asked the question, we are completely against the use of fossil fuels. Thank you.
So thanks for the question. That is a great segue for what I wanted to explain about the climate compact that I am proposing that will break the deadlock that has really paralysed our moving forward on the urgency of climate action. We've seen our parties locked in a partisan stalemate, so we need to move the negotiations out of Parliament. And indeed, we have a historical precedent. The 1983 Prices and Income Accord, which was based on the National Economic Summit, paved the way for the nation to be able to then return in Parliament to a negotiated outcome. That is what I'm proposing that can be achieved by the end of this year, building on the climate roundtable that has involved business and it has involved unions and industry, has involved the Farmers Federation. They have taken it into their own hands because government hasn't been able to act. But in this next 47th Parliament, we can move forward and have Parliament support this climate compact to then bring it back into Parliament in order to legislate and budget for the next budget to ensure that we achieve a 50% reduction as a minimum in our carbon emissions by 2030. And then move on to the second part of the negotiation, which is to move away from export and to be able to do that in a way that assures all those communities that are going to be affected by that transition that we are looking to ensure that no one is left behind. And then finally, in investing in renewables, to give certainty to the business community that no one is going to be a first mover and will be disadvantaged. That negotiated outcome is the only way forward to achieve true climate action.
I believe that the science is clear that we cannot put any more fossil fuels into the sky and we need to be keeping all of them in the ground. The difficulty is that science doesn't tell you what you should do. That is a values decision. If you believe that you're here for a short time and the person who gets the most toys at the end and then dies, then perhaps you might wish to continue digging up the fossil fuels. If, as some of our political leaders have said, they don't really pay attention to what's happening in the next 20 years, then there's no attention. So my personal position, and the position that I'm standing on, is that we need to stop fossil fuel exertion. What I would actually be able to do, after 30 years in emergency departments, one of my primary roles as a senior staff specialist was to negotiate an outcome between 5 people, none of whom wanted to be there and one of whom was psychotic, which we needed to deliver within the next sort of hour and a half. I would bring that skill set to the Parliament with a view to attempting to reduce the number of fossil fuels. I just thought I would clarify one small point from my stump speech. I have a degree of emotional involvement in this. I support the Greens' ideals. Perhaps I have some differences in policy.
Not much different. Australian Progressives have a policy on reducing climate emissions by 2030, opening no new coal-fired plants, and a huge investment in renewables and a transition away from coal exports into exporting of our science and technology, basically.
Thanks, Monique. Labor's plan is a broad and detailed plan. It starts with upgrading the existing electricity grid to fix energy transmission and drive down power prices. We have to make electric vehicles cheaper with an electric car discount, Australia's first national electric vehicle strategy, much of which was rolled out yesterday at our launch. We're going to allocate up to $3 billion from Labor's National Reconstruction Fund to invest in green metals, steel, alumina and aluminium, clean energy component manufacturing, hydrogen electrolyzers and fuel switching, agricultural methane reduction and waste reduction. We'll provide direct financial support for measures that improve energy efficiency within existing industries and develop new industries in regional Australia through a new Powering the Regions Fund. We're going to roll out 85 solar banks around Australia to ensure more households can benefit from rooftop solar. We're going to install 400 community batteries across the country. The first in being will be in Fannum. The second is likely to be here in Weston Creek on the Molonglo Valley. We'll demonstrate Commonwealth leadership by reducing the Australian Public Service's own emissions to net zero by 2030. You have to lead by example. We invest in 10,000 new energy apprentices and a new energy skills program. That's part of the solution to moving away from fossil fuel reliance and the jobs in that sector. We'll establish a real-world vehicle fuel testing program to inform consumer choice. We'll work with large businesses to provide greater transparency on their climate-related risks and opportunities, and we'll re-establish leadership by restoring the role of the Climate Change Authority while keeping decision-making and accountability with government and introducing new annual parliamentary reporting by the Minister.
We might move on to the next question. Thank you.
Okay, this is just out of curiosity. Wouldn't more infrastructure contribute more to climate change? And also, if it doesn't, then how would you include a more climate-friendly infrastructure?
Yeah, can you? I don't think a mic's loud enough, is that?
The question was, just out of curiosity, doesn't more infrastructure contribute to more climate change? And how, if not more, how would you then mitigate that? I think that was the question.
Yeah. Who would like to answer that question?
I didn't say infrastructure.
That's a great question. And I think this is one of the big problems that we have to solve, and we need to be investing in building for the future. Not only the buildings we build today will be around in 2050, and that's potentially going to be faced with different challenges in terms of climate, but how do we start to build in a more climate-friendly way? And there's some amazing technology being developed here in Australia that I would love to see invested in and taken to the rest of the world that I think can actually start to solve some of these problems that we're facing. So it's not I don't have all the answers, but I think it's something that a lot of smart people are working on, and we need to be valuing that and investing in it. In the last budget, we allocated $11.8 billion to subsidise fossil fuels. If we could redirect some of that into solving these sorts of problems, I think we can have an amazing future.
Can I add, just building on that theme, that in order to be able to come up with these solutions, we really need to invest in higher education. I mean, you think during the COVID period, at the same time as the government was relying on the wonderful research that led to the capacity that we didn't even envisage at the beginning of having the program to have our injections and so forth in that process, that wouldn't have happened if not for the investment in higher education. But at the same time, we were seeing the cutting of the investment in our research community. Research is key for solving so many of the problems that we have no idea are ahead of us, and that is another way, I think, of dealing with these issues.
So there are two elements to this. One is we actually have to look at the materials that go into infrastructure and how we manufacture them. So that's why the investment in research into green steel and aluminium is so critical. So that's important to start off with. But the other issue is that we actually see lots of examples of this around us. So I'm not sure if anyone's aware of the passive house movement that's starting to grow here in Canberra. If you don't, go and have a look at the Torrens Early Learning Centre. Will give you a bit of a heads up. But basically, what we're going to be much better at doing is making sure where we do build infrastructure that it's as energy efficient as possible. And if you look at passive house concepts, you can actually get to a point where you have infrastructure which actually is generating energy itself. So we actually have to look at obviously the components, how we manufacture them, and how that goes into infrastructure. And there's a lot of promising developments there, but it's only still promising. But we actually have to look at the standards in terms of ensuring that for the life of infrastructure, that they are as energy friendly and as climate friendly as possible too.
Thank you, candidates.
All right, yep, no, microphone's working, just got to project.
I was just wondering what the panellists' view is of the government rescinding the law to at least discuss the option of introducing nuclear power as a way of breaking through some of this climate change issue.
Nuclear power, who wants this one first?
Any takers? Any takers? Anyone?
David wants it.
Look, to be brutally honest, the numbers don't add up in terms of the economics of nuclear power in Australia. There's going to be a challenge if we have nuclear submarines about how we maintain those properly without access to some sort of nuclear power generation. That's a challenge, but realistically we should be playing to our strengths, and that's actually going to renewable energy sources and really focusing on solar, geothermal, wind. That's where our major benefits are going to be.
David, the question was really about rescinding the law to allow the discussion, not the actual introduction. It's the starting point, not the end point.
I can have a discussion.
I understand your question. Thank you very much for clarifying it. Firstly, I'll say that the Greens policy is to not engage with nuclear power, and I'll talk to you about it from a First Nations perspective. We have a law that talks about, and stories that talk about not digging up nuclear, not digging up yellowcake for the express purpose of its use in anything. The reason we have that law and that story is because we understand its destructive quality in the world. So I'll answer the question by saying that we don't think there ought to be a dialogue about it. I have a personal view, but I won't say what it is. That's the political view and the policy view from the Greens. And my view as a First Nations woman is to follow the law of my ancestors. And I think my Greens companion would like to share a minute in this.
I would like to say that in a democracy, I think we should be entitled to have a discussion about it. So yes, I think rescinding the law to have a discussion is fine. But as Janara said, and personally, I don't agree with nuclear power, but economically, it actually doesn't stack up. Nuclear power plants are very expensive and take a long time to build. We need action now. So renewables are the answer, not nuclear. But discussion, yes, I think we're all entitled to have a discussion. We all have different views, but we can come together and talk about them. Thank you.
I can speak quick as well. Australian Progressives, we have discussed having the discussion, and we have in our policy platform that we would like to have a discussion about nuclear energy, drawing on, I mentioned empathy and ethics earlier. Another one we have starting for letter E is evidence, because we'd like to have a look at the evidence from other countries, see if it's applicable here, and have the discussion. But like many of the other speakers, we have a preference to look at the renewables, but why not have a discussion?
I wanted to draw from your point about the nature of policy development and a fear of highly politicised, toxic discussion that I think is surrounding that question. And I do think that we have got to a point in our evolution as a nation of being frustrated by the highly partisan nature of really important and wicked problems, and not being able to engage with one another, fearful of the backlash or the partisanship involved. And I do truly believe that we're at a point where we should change the way we do politics and policy, so that we can without fear, engage with very significant issues that may have very diametrically opposed views, but in a way that is respectful and that is truly about getting to the best policy outcome in any particular issue.
Hi, I'd like to just change tack from climate change, if that's okay. We've got a situation in Australia at the moment where, on average, one woman is dying each week through violence, and it can't continue. It's something we need to talk about, and it's something that should be a forefront of everyone's minds. And I just wanted to put it out to the candidates to, I guess, maybe talk for a minute or two what you can do on a federal level, but also a local level about, we've just got to stop this. We've got to somehow stop women dying at the hands of people they know.
Let's throw to Jane first. Thanks, Sharon.
G'day, Sharon. Thanks for that question. Absolutely. Personally, from my point of view, child sexual assault, domestic violence, I spent a good part of 2013 training to run for 7 marathons in 7 days in 7 states. I did it again in 2017 for Bravehearts, an organisation that helps and looks after children of, that are survivors of sexual assault. I would need to get back to you on the specific policy, if we have any, or what our approach is from the Liberal Party. But I'd be more than happy to do the research that needs to be done to get back to you and give you some real answers in a political sense. But thank you for the question.
Thank you so much for the question. One of the things I note about Australia is that they're well behind some of the other parts of the world in dealing with family violence and the understanding of family generational dysfunction in families of origin. So this has been my field of research and work as an academic since 1987, when I started working in a women's refuge here in Canberra that looked after women who were homeless on the streets with dependency and addiction problems who went to the detox. I trained in America for 3 years in a clinic that took people from all walks of life and dealt with family dependency, whether it was process dependencies around addiction to gambling and other things, but also chemicals, drugs and alcohol, and the impact that all of those things have on families. And what I do know in Australia is we do not take this into account when we look at family violence. And actually, the 50 years of research that have gone into this field show that it is so important to deal with family recovery, and that violence is only one of those things. I'm a child of abuse and violence myself and have had a process of recovery in my own life, and I have managed a foundation for Indigenous recovery and development for the last 20 years with 3 other Aboriginal women and our elders, because precisely we've got generational trauma, not just from violence, but from the violence that has come with colonisation. And as a result, we have had to learn that those things need to be dealt with in order for people to recover. You cannot separate men and women from family violence. You cannot separate children. It is something that has to be done together. And it has to include all of the things in society that affects a family. Thank you, Panya.
I mean, this is something that I've been hearing across the ACT. People are saying enough is enough. And I think culturally we have to stop talking about this as a women's issue. This is a men's issue. This is a cultural issue that we have to front up to. In terms of practical things, the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children for the next decade, we need to ensure that the next government properly consults and resources that, and then fully implements the respective work, set the standard and foster review to actually start to clean up and set the standard at the top. But I do think we're going to need have big conversations as communities and as a country, the way that we are treating women and children in our communities.
Thanks, Sharon, for the question. Look, this is a really profound societal issue about men's and women's safety and the exercise of power in our society. And I don't think there are single measures, although each of the issues that have been raised so far are important, but it is actually, I think, a strongly structural approach that is needed to think about the place of gender in society and the expectations around gender. And that starts right at the beginning, in the home, in shared parenting, and the ways in which we characterise the roles of men and women in society. If we were able to create a framework where parental leave was expected for each of the parents, and so that right from the start, children grew up in an environment of equality, that would be one of the particularly profound starting points to start shifting the dial on the way we see men and women in society. Then there are the economic issues that create environments that effectively propel an imbalance in power in terms of wages for different areas of work and the profound gender pay gap. But then also is the issue of the exercise of power in our parliament. Until we have equal numbers of women in our parliament with an expectation of that as a norm, we won't be able to move sufficiently to really move the dial on this issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Sharon. One of our Progressives candidates in Queensland is actually a domestic violence survivor, and so we've adopted some very strong policies around addressing domestic violence. I agree with you that this is unacceptable. There's a couple of practical initiatives that we've been looking at, including some case studies from the US where, for want of a better word, a one-stop shop with trained female police officers that take on the domestic violence cases, because there's some issues in policing and in the legal system in Australia that is not kind of preventing the escalation of some of the incidents. So our candidate in Queensland is proposing that their particular electorate is used for one of these trials. Also, there's a lot of talk about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, etc. But at the end of the day, it takes strong leadership, it takes resourcing, and it needs assigning that responsibility to leaders in the community to really make this happen. And I think that starts at the political level. So the Progressives have got some strong policies around that. I encourage you to have a look at them. Thanks.
I'm familiar with the consequences of domestic violence from my 30 years in my previous job. I think two things. Part of the challenge locally relates to affordable housing. I think it was Alan Coleman who said we need the pessimists, we've had enough optimists in politics. I have been disappointed with the state Labor-Green combination, that under the state Labor-Green combination, our social housing remains about the same as it was in terms of numbers perhaps a decade ago. The feedback from your housing, David Pocock's Housing Forum, was that the social housing groups have attempted to negotiate some changes to facilitate and with more involvement in the production of social housing, and so far not had particularly receptive outcomes. And there's a guy called Cameron Murray, who is a housing economist, who suggests that the ACT government's housing policy is more similar to a property developers than one responsible for social housing. So my third priority is affordable housing. We currently have a year's wait for emergency housing for women with children seeking refuge from domestic violence. I don't regard that as acceptable. I have had an interest in emotional regulation for quite a long time. A midwife colleague and I were involved ran a study 10 years ago, which is currently sitting with ethics for publication approval, where we demonstrated that if you provide expectant parents with a 2-day workshop before they deliver their child, 8 years later, one can demonstrate that there is less hostility in the relationship from this 2-day workshop compared to a control group for the ones that we have follow-up. So I think there are some things that could be done in that space. The issue is clearly much larger and more complex, but one must make a start somewhere. Thank you.
As part of Labor's national housing strategy, we're looking at 30,000 sort of houses into the social and affordable housing market in the first 5 years of hopefully a Labor government. Of that, 4,000 are to be set aside particularly for those fleeing domestic violence. It's critical that substantial numbers of properties are there. People, you need a safe place to go to. Alongside that, we need to restore appropriate funding for domestic violence services, including community and legal aid services as well.
Just very quickly, we do need more women in Parliament. We need to empower women and provide more resources to organisations that help women and families, because part of the reason that people stay in abusive relationships is often they have no choices, and we want to give people choices. So it's more funding and education for families in general, men and women, because I think Kim is actually right, a lot of it is cultural and we need to change the norms. But yes, more funding for those services. Thank you.
Let's throw to the next question, Ryan.
All right, so we have a question that's been sent in online, and the question is as follows. As the population of Canberra increases, new ways need to be found to tackle the increasing price of housing and rent within the city, with houses in the new development areas in Molonglo reaching unaffordable levels for first home buyers. With our suburbs pushing into our geographic and environmental limits, is it time for Canberra to build up and not out? And what is the role of the National Capital Authority in facilitating that?
Yeah.
Well, certainly I think the answer is yes to part of that. So we have to be looking at more medium and high density living. But beside that, there are possibilities to make housing more affordable for more Canberrans, and certainly the positions that Anthony Albanese was talking about yesterday, launching the capacity for shared equity housing schemes have got the capacity to make significant difference to many sort of families across Canberra. Whether it's more likely to have the most substantial difference though in apartment living. So with those proposals for properties of at a price of about $600,000, you're looking at saving potentially $240,000 in the mortgage with the capacity to then repay that, buy that equity back if you so choose over the life of a loan. However, the bigger issue, dealing with the NCA, that can be a bit of a challenge as somebody that's been on the National Capital Territories Committee. They often have views about vistas and which at times will be quite limiting in terms of the height of particular corridors. And I think there's an opportunity perhaps to have a broader conversation about a national capital plan with the Canberra community. It's something which it should be open. Anyone who's been involved in a consultation with the National Capital Authority will understand that often they're very limited. Often you don't find out till quite late in the piece that those consultations are occurring, and then in terms of actually having some capacity to change what occurs. So I think we need to have a conversation about potentially changing the National Capital Plan, which can then possibly power that capacity for medium and high density living.
In the ACT, we have limited borders. There's only so far we can build. For sustainability reasons, we really do need to infill, and that means high density. Look, I have a garden, I love my garden, but I understand if our population increases, that we may have to have smaller blocks with more people on them. It's very expensive to have more infrastructure built, including public transport. You know, not everyone agrees with the light rail, but there will be, you know, infill building around the light rail, and that's how we'll solve the housing issue. Because unless we go into New South Wales, we have limited land here. I do think there should be a review of the National Capital Authority and the National Capital Plan as well. I think it's time to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, we do have that dual planning regime here with the National Capital Plan. I think on the issue of housing affordability, that whoever forms the next government has to take this seriously. We need to develop a national housing strategy as a start, and I'd be pushing for the next government to actually have the Minister for Housing in Cabinet and give this issue the weight and the attention that it deserves. It's clearly not working for a lot of Australians. In terms of the NCA, this has been raised with me by a number of people in Canberra. Concerns around consultation and communities not being listened to. It's been suggested that there needs to be better local representation on the board, and I'd agree with that. So I do think we probably need to review it and look at how that's working. We clearly need more collaboration between the federal and the territory government, and as a Canberran myself, that's one of my big frustrations. We're not seeing that collaboration.
The National Capital Authority needs a complete overhaul. The planning between the Territory Plan and the NCA doesn't work. They're beholden to virtually nobody. They don't consult the ACT government or even the Territory Plan, I imagine. I've had a run-in with them, or a number of First Nations community people have had a run-in with them in relation to environmental and sites of significance. On land, they don't do those environmental studies at all, and they do not do any studies around sites of significance on Ngunnawal country, which is just a travesty and completely wrong. So they need a complete overhaul. They're not democratic, and they need to be more democratic. Perhaps they actually need to be gotten rid of. Thank you.
As affordable housing is one of my top three priorities, I felt I should probably say something. At the Conservation Forum, Tim Hollow suggested that the experience around land use in the ACT involved 4 separate autonomous organisations, none of whom talk to each other and none of whom would take any responsibility. My career in public service meetings, that sounded extremely familiar, and we would need to broker something about that. I think that we do have to urban infill. There's a depressing YouTube urban planner talking about Detroit and suggesting that Detroit, as the first suburban city on the planet, is just 40 years ahead of everywhere else, and the infrastructure costs associated with maintaining progressively larger suburban houses become unmanageable, so we're going to have to do some sort of infill. We do need planning around how that is managed. The experience in the inner north, where 4 primary schools were closed because there weren't any children, and then we infilled, but we didn't do anything because, as a planner told me, well, the education director was supposed to put in a submission about that, and they didn't, so that we don't have any schools there now for all these children who don't live there because they're apartments. In terms of affordability, I don't understand why, if you're buying your 99th house and the interest on your loan can be a tax deduction against your business, if you're buying your first house at a point where we've arrived where the thing is completely unaffordable, this interest cannot also, with a stroke of a pen, be made a tax deduction against your income. Neither of the major parties, I think, have much of a policy that addresses renters. 30% of the current population is renting. We need to do something to increase that security. Perhaps we need to look to a more European model. I'm not sure what the solution is, but this has to be done. Thank you.
Points, because I know there are further questions, but the structural issues that are really important always to come back to. The proposal to have 4 senators is not only better representation in relation to the diversity of our city and our territory, but is also about the relationship between the federal and territory governments and their apportionment of funds for needs such as housing. Until we have a guaranteed representation where the parties don't take Canberra and the ACT for granted, our true needs and voice won't be taken seriously because it has to go through the parties. If we have a lower proportion that the actual quota would drop to 20% if we had 4 senators, so that we would be assured of having more than just the major parties in our parliament, the needs of Canberrans would be taken seriously.
Thank you, Kim. I just wanted to put it out there that we did actually invite Senator Zelja and Senator Gallagher, and they chose or declined and weren't able to make it. So it'd be nice to have, if we did have 4, maybe we'd get 2 then. I'll throw it to the next question.
Australia's been known, or Australians are some of the best innovators and researchers, but Australia's got one of the poorest reputations for actually putting money into research and innovation. We had basically in the University of New South Wales, we developed a lot of this solar technology. Couldn't get money here in Australia, went over to China, now importing solar panels. In the past, the Australian government set up Commonwealth Bank, Telstra, but my question is, we need the federal government to start investing in Australian ideas to actually grow our own resources, our independence and sustainability, and support the country, and we'll all benefit from that. Is there any plans for any of that?
Look, that's a great point that you make there. The Australian Progressives are very much into investing in our own innovation and research. We think it's been underdone, it's been underfunded, it's been way too long. We are a smart country, we keep saying we're a smart country, so why don't we put our money where our mouth is and really invest in that level of research, innovation, and provide those incentives for those people with ideas and entrepreneurship to take those forward. I have a similar example of a friend who was a renewable energy expert, ended up not being able to get a job in Australia, moved to Sweden, is living there and doing amazing things, but wouldn't it be great to have that guy back here? Thank you.
As an academic, I would like to answer your question by saying that there's too much politicisation in the research agenda now with universities. Particularly, we've seen it under the Liberal National Coalition over the last little while since they've been in government. This has to be removed. Universities are places of learning and places that do research, obviously, that are not universities. And it's important as a country that we become a smart and innovative and creative country, and that we put education as a high priority and research in tertiary education as a high priority. There are parts of university research that never get funded. We have to compete for funding constantly. It's a terrible administrative nightmare when you have to do it. And I just think, why make this system so hard? It could be much more simple, less complex, and be supporting all sorts of innovative research across the whole sector. So I think taking out the politicisation of it is extremely important.
I mean, it's a great question, and something that I think we've really dropping the ball on as a country over the last decade. We've seen research and development as a percentage of GDP go down. We're well below other OECD countries. There's research from University of Australia that shows for every dollar you invest in research, you get $5 back in the economy.
Or other countries invest in it and they get the benefit out of our research.
Yeah, everything from Wi-Fi to the cochlear implant. We've got a proud history of we should be valuing it, and it's such a shame to see Australian startups and inventions having to go overseas to commercialise and access better funding and investment. And it's something that we can change. It's about priorities and the kind of future we want to build.
So Labor's committed to a National Reconstruction Fund, which many of you might have heard about. It's looking at $15 billion worth of capital investment in research through loans, equity and guarantees. It's a serious business. Look, alongside it, we're looking at a national rail manufacturing plan, establishing a Centre for Disease Control. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but the opportunities are huge. In this region, we are incredibly well placed to do work in the space sector. That's an area that I myself did a fair bit of work in myself in my previous work representing engineers and scientists. We're doing a lot of international leading work in terms of small satellite manufacturing. So keep your ears open. You'll hear about a few announcements again in relation to that National Reconstruction Fund and how it's going to apply not just in places outside of Canberra, but also in Canberra in terms of backing in really nation-leading research. But the other thing we need to see happen is we need to see research grants programs depoliticised. We saw one of the most disgraceful things occur in terms of the politicisation of the ARC grants, and that's something that the Labor government will be committed to.
So I can tell you that the government has launched its 2021 National Research Infrastructure Roadmap, and will invest $900 million over 5 years on tools, technology, and skills to make Australian research even more globally competitive. That I can at least inform you of. If you need any more detail about it, just let me know, and I shall follow up. Thanks, Mike.
Just very quickly, one of the ways we can move away from fossil fuels is to put money into research for new technologies. We already have a lot of new technologies, but we can do more. We want to bring back manufacturing to Australia. We have the people and we don't want them going overseas. So we need to restore funding to universities as well and stop them being profit centres. And the degrees are just not what they used to be. That's my experience. So I think we need to put more funding into research. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill, have you got a question for us?
I do. You hear me? Good. I've got an online question. There's quite a number of people out there watching and sending emails to us and we're picking the eyes out of them. Can you hear me okay there? Yes. Yeah. I like this one from a guy called Howard. So when you answer, look at the camera, say hello to Howard. In the United States, the federal government has proposed to make certain grants to local governments conditional upon that local government changing zoning laws to increase housing supply and affordable housing. Would you support, or maybe go stronger, would you advocate the Commonwealth pursuing a similar strategy in Australia?
It's a good question. I don't know the details of that. What I do believe we need is a national housing strategy, and as part of that you would have experts looking at what can be done, what should Australia be focusing on in terms of housing going forward, and then how do we roll that out across all levels of government in Australia. We clearly need some bigger picture thinking and to look elsewhere. This is not a problem that's unique to Australia. Other places around the world are doing it better than us, and we should be learning from them.
Thank you, Howard. I'm not sure about the nuances of US legislation and how that would translate to Australia. I think that my father spent his career working in Canberra in the Federal Department of Housing and Construction. It was regarded as a federal responsibility. He retired, I think, from that role in 85, and I think the department was dissolved in about 91, and here we are. So I think that we have demonstrated that a sort of disparate free market solution has failed, and we need to be moving back to some more centralised control, at least temporarily.
Housing supply, housing affordability, I think it's clear that the market doesn't make that work. I mean, houses are becoming less affordable, supply is compressed, etc. So I think there needs to be more innovative government-led solutions on this, and I think I can't really comment on that US example either, but those sorts of examples are worth us looking at and seeing what we might learn in terms of evidence from elsewhere to bring into our space. Thanks.
So in announcements about housing yesterday from Anthony Albanese, he announced that a Labor government would have a National Housing Council with states and territories with seats at that table to talk about both supply and land release. It should be an obvious no-brainer, but as has been said earlier, for the last decade we haven't really had a national housing strategy. We've got an opportunity to do that in 19 days' time.
I think housing is definitely an issue that's coming through loud and clear tonight to all the candidates. Next question, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to all the candidates for being here tonight and for making yourselves accountable to voters. I think the other candidates also need to be accountable, so my question is actually to Zed Zelja, although you may take it on notice. Zed, can you hear me? In July last year, I wrote to you about the community survey on your website. Your website said the survey would help you represent my interests and values, but it only allowed me to endorse Liberal Party slogans like lower taxes or comment on local government matters. There was nowhere in the survey for me to raise my own concerns about federal issues, so there was no way it could help you to represent my interests or my values. 10 months later, I'm still waiting for you to reply to my letter, and your survey is still on your website. So I rang your office last week. I'd given up on getting a written reply, but I thought I just wanted to know where you'd be campaigning so I could tell you about my concerns. Your office would not tell me where you would be. In fact, they said you were not holding any public events or advertising your whereabouts in advance. They said the only way I might see you in the flesh would be if I happened to be at a shopping centre or an invitation-only event where you made an appearance. I have a better chance of winning lotto. So, you didn't answer my letter, you won't tell people where you are, and you haven't turned up tonight to listen to your constituents. Why are you avoiding ordinary voters, and why should we vote for you?
Sorry, I didn't catch your name. Louis. So this is from Louis. In the metaverse, if Zed's team is watching this feed, please drop in a comment and a response for Louis. He would love to hear from you. Thank you. Next question. Oh, do you want to reply?
I don't know what I can take this note if you like.
Jane has offered. Do you want to just message what? See you respond.
Yeah, Louis, how about you give me your name, number and your sheet of paper and I'll make sure it gets to Zed. Okay? Cool. Thank you.
Next question.
Thanks, Louis. I like that question too.
I'm Colette, and from the local community here. Just a question, with the growing population, as well as increasing rates of obesity, depression, anxiety, mental ill health, what do you see as the role of community sport and recreation in benefiting the wellbeing of our communities? The lack of available indoor facilities to combat this is well documented and debated, but nothing's been done to address the issue, and in fact we've lost a number of usable facilities and have essentially gone backwards. So how will you support our indoor sports, and in particularly those community sports, to grow and to continue their important work locally?
Thank you, Paula. That is something that is very passionate or very close to our. Yeah, it's really something that's palpable within the Canberra region, because we are losing our facilities, and in newer areas we aren't gaining any either. So the population's growing. What are we going to do? I think Kim's going to kick us off. Yeah, good help.
Excuse the pun. So thank you for your question, and in fact I remember talking to you at the meeting here about the lack of sufficient numbers of sporting facilities for basketball, and I've since also met with the president of basketball ACT.
And volleyball.
And volleyball, but it's not only those, that's right, there's just so many that are in desperate need. And I think this comes back to the issue that Canberrans are taken for granted in relation to the parties not responding to the needs of the community. So back to this notion of better representation, where we can actually reflect the needs of the community, the growing population and the lack of infrastructure for something as fundamental as sport. I mean, sport does represent so much value add to the community in terms of mental health, in terms of social cohesion, in terms of skills for our youth. It is key to moving forward. So we are the only territory that doesn't have sporting vouchers for kids in terms of participating in sport. There is so much work that can be done that represents really investing in the needs, and having a representative who can directly take that into the parliament is a way forward to moving to that goal.
As a mum of 4 kids who are very active, also myself, I'm a long distance runner. I have had numerous years, hours taking kids to sporting events, etc. If there was any need to have any more facilities, which you've highlighted, and I can see there is, once my grandchildren come along, it'll even be a greater obvious point to me. I'll be here fighting for more sporting facilities in the south, you can be sure of that.
So firstly, I think the points you make are really well made in terms of the value of sport. I think it's really often lost too. I think often people see sport through the prism of just professional sport and not through the extraordinary value of community sport. It's importance to social cohesion, to actually building of skills. I mean, towards, you think of the whole fabrics of our clubs and the layers of volunteers who are involved. It's actually often a place where people can create a new identity for themselves too. Sort of that things may not be working out at school, they might not be working out in the workplace, but you can actually do something through sports. Sport's really important. Over the last 3 years, it's been, for me, it's been really interesting because I've talked to nearly all the major sports organisations in Canberra and particularly in Bean, and I can tell you that the opportunities to get support for infrastructure at a federal level over the last 3 years have been pretty seriously lacking. We've had to do some things around the edges, do some small improvements to infrastructure. Look, today we made announcements of where I think we'd like to begin in terms of effectively significant changes, significant upgrades to the Weston Creek tennis courts. Those tennis courts have an age span of between 4 and 93 in terms of participants. If you look at the involvement across genders, it's one of the great inclusive sports, but particularly with the Molonglo Valley, it's bursting at the seams, so we need more courts. But the obvious thing that's missing for me is there actually isn't a 5 to 10 year plan for sports infrastructure. And look, I'm biased across the south, and we need that because The challenges faced by basketball are shared by netball, are also concerns for Aussie rules. A lot of our infrastructure dates back to the early 90s and there haven't been enough substantial changes. We occasionally get some at the edges. We've got good changes over in the Phillip precinct, but we need a lot more. But what we actually really need, as much as anything, is for two governments that can actually work together on a plan across that time to actually deliver the infrastructure that people deserve. As David Pocock said earlier, you look at per capita investment in infrastructure in Canberra, and over the last decade it tells you the story. It's way too low. It's time we got our fair share.
I'd suggest another contributing factor might be that if you're a pretty safe seat, you don't get much. Independent.
Thanks for the question, Colette. And having met with a number of the sports, this is a huge issue in Canberra. And I think particularly coming out of COVID and recognising the importance of health, and for parents, the competing pool of devices, sport needs to be accessible. We need to be ensuring that if people want to play sport, they can. And meeting with David Simpson from Basketball ACT today in their facility that was built in 1988, and they have a waiting list of 100 players who can't. They simply don't have space for them. Last year they turned away 500 players. That should be happening. I think we're missing out on federal funding. We don't have access to regional infrastructure funding, which I think we should probably look at. We play a really important role in this region. That's something I think we should look at. The 2019 sports rules, a number of clubs missed out here in Canberra, given we're so safe. So we do have to prioritise it and look at it in terms of, it's an investment in our kids, in our future, and in dealing with a lot of these problems, that if you actually allow kids to be healthy and participate, I think we're going to save a huge amount of money down the track. So we need to shift the way we actually think about these costs. But yeah, certainly a lot to do, and I'd be pushing whoever forms the next government to make sure that we start to address this across all the sports that need it.
Community sport is very important, as everyone has said, but we do need to get more infrastructure funding. I understand we need places for volleyball, badminton, gymnastics and table tennis, and they can't be all in the same facility for various reasons of setting up and packing up. The other issue, of course, is we need more indoor facilities. During the bushfires, a lot of outdoor sports weren't even possible, so we have to consider that with a changing climate, we do need more indoor facilities. And I do believe that community sports are actually, I don't want to say more important, because I know a lot of people love football and other sports, but community facilities are used every day by the community, and often schools share facilities as well. So rather than spending money on a big stadium, I would suggest we should put more money into community facilities. And really, the AIS should never be allowed to be degraded as it is, and that should be fixed up. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Next question.
Hi, I'm Glenda. Look, you've all done an amazing job. We've talked about some really big issues, but there is one issue, and it is the voluntary assisted dying issue, which I attended something in the ACT, and I was absolutely horrified to hear that Census Seldra was against having a right for us to legislate inside the ACT, and it's written in the Right Act recently, because in 1997, the Howard government stripped both of the territories of the right to euthanasia and the right to assisted dying. So we're in the situation now, and Zed does not support, he's not keen on the ACT having new territory rights that would allow the two territories to legislate on that. So I do want to know everybody's view on assisted dying, but I also think it is pretty outrageous that Queanbeyan does have assisted dying because it's New South Wales and Victoria has it. It's going right around Australia, and this is, it isn't a major issue, but it does actually reflect the fact that Zed doesn't listen to us. He doesn't, because the majority of ACT population do support a form of assisted dying. Now we have to talk about what form that would be, but I do think we do support it. We're educated. We want to have that discussion. And he's not allowing us to have that discussion. I think that is really disgusting. I really do. I think, somebody was about, let's have the discussion about nuclear power. Let's have the discussion about voluntary assisted dying. So, I just wanted to ask you all about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim, do you want to start? So yes, in a democratic framework, there is absolutely no excuse for not supporting your own territory's laws to be continued. And even though constitutionally it's possible for the Commonwealth to override it, I think that as an evolution of democracy, it is no longer proper. So I would certainly support the repeal of that legislation, but it is also part of my reasoning for having 4 senators. Because once you have 4 senators, you have greater strength to resist any attempt to override any piece of ACT legislation.
One of the first bills I spoke on in the Senate was the attempt to repeal the Andrews bill, which was unfortunately unsuccessful. And this is where I might actually agree with Kim. Maybe if we had 4 senators, we might have actually got it up at that particular point. But I've spoken in the House about this issue too. Regardless of whether we might stand on VAD itself, we're a mature enough jurisdiction to have that debate. We're just a jurisdiction that's entrusted with health care of our population. It's outrageous that we can't have that debate. And let's hope we're in a position that the next Parliament is able to resolve that issue in the right way.
Progressives in favour of the voluntary assisted dying and also in favour of strengthening our ability for the territory to make an inform its own laws. So I agree with Kim on that. Thanks.
I certainly support and would prioritise ensuring that we have the right to debate and make those laws. Having sat with a couple of people here in the ACT who have terminal illnesses, are looking at dying in the next year or 2, they shouldn't have to be weighing up whether they need to move to Victoria and live there for 12 months so that they have that option. This is about dignity and ensuring that people at that stage in their life have the choice.
Yes, the Greens agree that we have the right, we should have the right in the ACT to have the dialogue on legislation for assisted dying, and I will add that I think it's time the ACT became a state.
Been involved in many people's passing. It is clear that our cultural values are shifting, and at this point in time, 80% of our population feel that they would like to have the option for themselves. So I think there can be no doubt that we should be able to have that debate and progress it. The reality is that it is often anxiety and distress about feared things that make one's suffering worse, and the knowledge that there is a choice makes things far easier for many people. That's been my observation, and that is supported by the literature. The number of people who end up choosing to act in that way is relatively low. Probably, as long as we have adequate palliative care services, there's still about 2% of the population of people in palliative care services whose symptoms aren't really appropriate, but they're not comfortable, that's terrible for them. But for most people, almost everybody, the knowledge that there is some sense of control on the way out makes things far more bearable. Thank you.
Where's the last look, this is personally for me. My mum passed away on the 4th of April. She was 94. We had talked about end of life. Had it come to that and she had asked, I would have done it. I think in some respects, until you're at that circumstance, until you're there, you just don't know. And every case is just case by case. This is just so hard to legislate about. She had a DNR anyway, so I had to answer that question when I was asked. So yes, I think people need to have the right. So that's where I stand.
So sorry about your mum, Jackie, if you're okay. Losing a family member is so tough. Bill, have you got another question?
I do. Thank you, Joan. I'd heard we discussed that the other day as well. Very moving position to be in, and then have the strength to get into another campaign. Wish I had that sort of personal strength. We've got lots of online questions, and we picked the best ones, and the rest are on our Facebook page. We're actually monitoring 3 feeds down the back there, so all those weird fellows down there doing a sterling job, and the vision actually looks better on here than it does. Hey. But the question from Majka is, how are you going to advocate for Canberra Health Services? How will you advocate for health staff as this pandemic continues and it's gradually grinding down? So that's from Majka, so please talk to Majka through the camera. Thank you.
Okay. Feels fitting that it should be Dr. Jamie that starts off. As the one with the most experience.
There needs to be some advocacy. I, from some lived experience, would have a capacity to provide that. I contemplated making some health things part of my key focus. The challenge for me this minute is that those whole experiences remain somewhat unprocessed. Absolutely, advocacy for the community in general, and health is a big part of our community, would be, it's my job as an independent to advocate.
So in a previous life, I represented a number of the health professionals at Canberra Hospital, and so firsthand saw a lot of the challenges that they faced pre-pandemic. And look, the reality is we've got significant challenges with our broader health workforce in terms of they're exhausted, they were already under enormous pressure before COVID. We know that we have to fix aged care, which is allied with healthcare, and a big part of that is actually investment in provision of nurses right across aged care too. But look, in terms of healthcare for the ACT, one of the most obvious areas that needs more emphasis is how critical we are to the whole region. So whilst you can think of Canberra as being 450,000, the reality is we service an area that's 1 million people strong. So we need to actually get proper resourcing that reflects the criticality of Canberra in the whole Southern East and New South Wales network, and that's where I'd be focusing on. And again, you know, with greater capacity to get a fairer go if we can have governments working together.
We do need more funding in Medicare. Even before COVID, as David said, our health system was stressed. There were long waiting lists. While some of health is under the ACT government, I think we also need federal leadership in terms of Medicare. A lot of things are not covered by Medicare unless you're wealthy or have a reasonable income and have private health insurance. There are some things that certainly are not covered. So I think we need to also make, as well as the funding into Medicare, we need to increase wages for health workers. We need to encourage more people to work because there's so many people who are great healthcare workers, but with COVID and all the isolation issues, it's caused problems. In the past, we've used immigration to fill a lot of spots, and I can see that that's probably the only short-term measure we can do at the moment. But we do have to remunerate health workers better too. And one other point is just that in Canberra we do have problems with access to specialists, so we need to also have incentives for doctors to actually work in the ACT, not just part-time or make people travel to Sydney, because if you're very unwell, that's really difficult. Thank you.
Majka, I think the other speakers have covered a lot of it. One of the things I have heard in the community is the need for more mental health support for frontline workers. We see stretched, dealing with more than they've ever had to deal with before, and we need to be ensuring that frontline workers are supported with, you know, adequate resourcing around mental health support when they need it.
We'll move along. So we've got one more or two questions. Yes.
Hello. Sorry, changing tack slightly after some very serious questions. I'd like to ask about campaigning, and this is probably more of a question for our smaller or independent candidates. How did you make choices around your campaigning methods? You know, social media, love a call flute, and how many photo attempts did it take before you found the perfect picture for your call flute? How bad are the other ones?
All right, who wants to? Kim? Yeah, Kim. Well, thanks for the spice with the question. Look, it's a really new experience for me. I haven't done this before. I've been, 25 years working in public policy and trying to make a difference from the outside. So wanting to try and come into Parliament to do it from the inside involves a different sort of kettle of fish in terms of putting oneself out there. So driving around and seeing your face on a call flute is really not my ideal sense of my pastime. But the photographer who took that photo was also someone who took my wedding photo. So perhaps the joy of that experience played out in the smile that you're seeing all the time. But it's a fair question in terms of how do you raise attention to something that you feel is so important but needs more than the group of people that you've met and had an impact on in your life in Canberra to the 100,000 or so people who need to know about you. And the reality is that requires making a TV ad and doing the social media and so forth. And that's been a very stimulating experience, but I do think that there is a superficiality about it, and in trying to change the way we do politics, I am trying all the time to bring my own voice into each of the expressions of my reaching out to everybody. And I hope in that way there is a way of changing politics so that we do hear truly what we each want to bring to the community. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. What the Australian Progressives would like to see is a level playing field in terms of getting information out there about parties and candidates. And we've spoken before about how great it would be if, say, a centralised body, say the Australian Electoral Commission, was able to provide every household with a small booklet which had information about every party and every candidate that was standing. And so that was delivered as a public service. And perhaps equal airtime on national broadcasters and radio as well. But at the moment, it's quite dependent on how much resources you have in terms of funding and in terms of volunteers. So a small party like the Australian Progressives does find it difficult to campaign. We are doing things, to be quite frank, on the cheap. So we are doing some letterbox flyers with volunteers. We're doing the core flutes, even though we don't love them, but to get our faces out there and to get known, we kind of have to. Photography, the last couple of campaigns I did, my husband took some photos, stuck them on a core flute, and there we are. This time I actually had a professional photo shoot done, and I think the money was well invested. Thanks for the question.
I think I'd echo the sentiments of Kim, going from a role where my job was sort of monitored in social media by people, and I was maintaining a very beige, non-responsive facade and presentation, to one where you need to be seen. In terms of getting the best shot, one is blessed with this particular raw material. Does one, look, there are other beetroot white guys who, aren't Barnaby. Is that a campaign slogan? I'd like to thank Chris for the superb job that he has done with the raw material that you see before you. I'd echo that one has to work with what one's got. And I had no plan to have a call through campaign. A very kind person explained to me that now you have to do this. You have to work with what you've got, what's available. There's been a significant groundswell in interest in independent campaigns, and for a variety of reasons. Part of it was in fact COVID exhaustion. I was equivocal about whether or not it would even stand this time until relatively late, and one of the consequences of the groundswell is that the volunteer workforce, who are also completely exhausted from COVID because the whole community's knackered, are far fewer thin on the ground. So I'm just contemplating this minute how we might manage this in the pre-poll, and I'm possibly thinking as things sort of get really tight that there'll be a bit of social media stuff involving, a horse and cart and a little sort of rosette, and how once upon a time 100 years ago you went to the pre-poll and you chatted to a person. But this is 2022, it's 100 years later. If there's no person at the pre-poll, who are you expecting to look it up on social media? Something like that, in a friendly kind of way. So, you work with what we've got, you try and see what people are at. Thank you.
I love the question. It's a wild ride as an independent. It's all new. The core flute ugly mug photo of me was taken by a mate in my living room. So you kind of just, for me it's about people, and so I've tried to make the whole campaign about people. The policy is based on hundreds, thousands of conversations to include all the volunteers, and just getting out there and actually meeting people and trying to make politics about people again, wanting to represent a community that I love. And I've been blown away by the number of people from all sides of politics who are frustrated, who want to see things done differently, and who are really energised by actually having a say in developing policy and saying, well, these are the issues that actually matter to us. And then here in Canberra, we're surrounded by experts. So if you don't know something, it's not hard to actually go and talk to someone who's spent their entire life working on that particular issue. So yeah, I'm sure it's going to be a big 2.5 weeks, those damn core flutes. I don't know, maybe in the future we can do without them, but it's just the game you have to play to get that name recognition.
question. I get a shock every time I see my picture on those big boards in front of someone's house. Of course, we don't do corflutes on the road, which I really love. And I just absolutely love this election campaign. It's just fabulous and I'm having a great time.
I know I'm not a small, coming from a small party perspective, but I just wanted to share a funny thing. So we've taken over my husband's mobile shed. You'll see it when you walk out the door. It's a 7-metre van and it's got 3 2-metre sized photos of me on it. And I've taken my mother out very many times for lunch in this van. Every single time. She had a little onset dementia. And every single time we got out of the car, out of the van, she'd say, "Oh, that's an awfully big picture of you." Just surprise her every time. I still feel quite, I suppose, churn in the stomach when I'm out driving it because people do look at you in very various forms. Some of them are like, yeah, and others are like, Anyhow, it's fun to be a part of.
After David's response, we've got one last question and then we're going to wrap for the evening.
Very briefly, it's not great when your children say that you look like Scott Morrison on your initial correspondence. And sorry, apologies, Jane. It's actually quite deflating. Look, I think if we can find a compact to a way where we don't need corflutes, that would be a great thing. Most Canberrans are really civil, so even whether you have disagreements when you come face to face, the campaigning is really, really good. But I thought it was just worth calling out that just in the last 24 to 48 hours, we've had some examples of pretty disgraceful racism, and particularly against Kim, who I think we're fortunate to have as one of our candidates running, and it's shameful what has occurred. It's also happened to Dr. Fuxin Lee, who's also running for the Senate, and that's not the Canberra I know, and let's hope that people can at least do the right thing and try and be civil and friendly through the campaign. The majority do.
That's an interesting thought, David. I agree. I think some of the stuff that's been going on, there's been some horrible comments put on corflutes and other different types, but also the actual misinformation that's put out there against candidates. I think I'd like to see the Electoral Commission and some laws changed so we don't have lies in our advertising. I think that is something that hopefully, I'm really hoping, because I had to explain that to my kids that, that was a lie. And I'm hoping by the next election we don't see that. So we've got one last question, so we'll just throw it to the floor and then we'll wrap for the evening. Thank you.
We've been asking for a federal inquiry into its wildlife, into the kangaroo or other land killers, and you could probably spread it out to all the other wildlife that seems to be mass extinction Australia-wide. You can't hear me?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so I was just going to actually, the money that's being wasted on it here in Canberra alone, $330,000, $380,000 on a fertility program which is actually genetically altering them to the mass extinction. The annual killing is $1.2 million. We don't know what the daily cost is, and it's probably a lot higher Australia-wide. So there is a mass extinction, it's an environmental problem, because they're gone, then the other wildlife are gone as well. They maintain a healthy, well-balanced ecosystem, so we're hoping that everyone here would be interested in actually calling, killing stop and fertility stop, and to have an inquiry federally in each state territory on the wellness, the welfare of the kangaroos and the other macropodial population and all of that, because we know that they're seriously declining. So I'm just interested to know who's prepared to call a federal inquiry into all the killings that's going on, the wellness, the welfare side of things as well, because we know it's violent as well.
The question was, we're a bit confused. I think anybody that's willing to call an inquiry into culling, is that what it is? And welfare?
No.
David, thanks.
I realise some people feel very strongly about this. I saw obviously the petition out and some of the reserves. I think the appropriate place for this though will be in the first place to have some sort of review within the ACT jurisdiction. I wouldn't support that this becoming a federal inquiry at this point.
It's a very important issue in the ACT. Our Greens Minister for the Environment has recently engaged in, rather than culling kangaroos, of fertility treatment. It's Greens policy, of course, that sentient beings should not be killed. And as a First Nations woman, I'm completely against it. Because these are our totemic ancestors, and particularly the Malu, because it belongs to my grandfather. Malu is a kangaroo in our language. And so, sometimes there are a compromise of value systems around this when you're in a party, I'll be honest about that. And so I've been very strong as the National Secretary of the First Nations Network in the Greens to put the perspective of the Black Greens in relation to the culling of kangaroos and not dealing appropriately with our wildlife, because it is something very close to our hearts and it is not something that we can allow the dominant culture or the white culture to do to our animals, to our country. Palia.
I apologise, Ryan has told me he has one last question.
Thank you, Minnie. Much has been made this evening of the lack of funding for infrastructure in the ACT compared to other jurisdictions. Our local senator has made much of the fact that he has secured more funding for the ACT compared to any other previous government since self-government. If that is the case, it suggests that the chronic underinvestment in the ACT across all aspects of infrastructure is broader than just one particular party, but affects the entire way in which funding is allocated across jurisdictions in the ACT specifically. So I guess my question is to the candidates this evening, how are you going to use your power, if you are elected, to address this imbalance? Now, Kim, I know what you're going to say, but my question extends to all candidates this evening is that what would you do and how would you utilise your power, if you are elected, to get the ACT a fairer share of the infrastructure pie?
The ACT Greens have a very clear policy in relation to this. So in terms of transparent criteria for Commonwealth funding with our territory, it needs to be much clearer. The criteria for our bilateral relationship funding is not open and transparent at all. The Greens think that we should be funding our cultural institutions much more strongly, and the APS, the Federal Public Service. Our national capital is obviously underfunded for decades in these areas, and the results are very, very clear that these institutions are suffering. We want to see more investment for Canberra and for our community, and support all Commonwealth infrastructure to ensure that safety and community needs are met. And we want more funding, obviously, for ACT infrastructure. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. It's quite a tough one, but if I was lucky enough to be elected to the Senate, the Australian Progressives have, I mentioned a few of our values before around ethics and evidence, etc. We also have engagement and empowerment. So I think we need to engage much more strongly between Commonwealth and state territory relationships. I'd work really hard to advocate for further infrastructure investment in the ACT. Also, strongly support Kim's idea of having additional senators in the ACT as well. I think Janara mentioned ACT becoming a state, in which case we'd have 12 senators.
Good question. I think the first part of it, having a record in 1 year doesn't undo a decade of underinvestment. That included, the Woolmore upgrade and money for the Tuggeranong cultural precinct, which are two fairly major projects. What I think we really need to be pushing whoever's in government to have more transparency and for infrastructure projects to actually be allocated on a needs basis. You looked at the last budget, a tiny proportion of the infrastructure spend was actually approved by Infrastructure Australia. What's the point in having a body like Infrastructure Australia that is looking at where we should be spending infrastructure to get the most bang for buck and where it's needed, if the government of the day just decides on a whim, oh, we'll fund this and this and this. Like, we have to be pushing government to be actually working for Australians. And we recognise that you can't get everything at once. But if you know that it's on a needs basis, when you do actually need it as a territory, you'll get it. So I think it's a big task ahead, and it really ties into integrity, and it's something that Australians want. And it's something that's achievable. We can do this and start to repair our democracy.
I have no background in infrastructure or engineering. My father was an engineer. He didn't seem very happy, so I decided I would choose another career. I haven't spent any time engaging with much detail with infrastructure. I think it is important, if we are spending infrastructure, that the money should be well spent. People often refer to the tram. I'm not sure that... So I think there are values in having sort of fixed light rail. I think Canberra would have been better served if the fixed light rail ran from the Belconnen interchange past the University of Canberra, past the University Rehab Hospital, round the corner, down to Calvary, through the Roos TAFE, perhaps through the ANU, then just go on to Civic, and then maybe gone to the Civic interchange, and then maybe gone out to the Civic Tech, so I could have had 2 techs with some car parking, 2 hospital, 2 universities, 2 bus changes, and been an employment shuttle. And I'm not sure that extending the tram line from Civic through the National Capital Triangle, around the corner, down Adelaide Avenue, and then down Yarra Glen is going to result, well, not going to the hospital, is actually going to contribute to much more infrastructure build. And when they did open the Northern Tram line, the consequence of the reorganised bus interchange, how many people live in Beam? How many people use the buses? How many people were able to use the buses effectively? Did that continue for you once everybody was shunted onto the tram line? So
my advice improved significantly. The question was specifically, how will you advocate for infrastructure spending in the ACT?
I would need to ensure that what we were spending on was actually going to be value for money, and I'd probably ring Kim, because I think collaborative approaches are very important.
So you have heard my answer, but can I add one further amplification of it? We know for certain that no matter who wins the next election and forms government in the lower house, they will not have a majority in the Senate. It's a half-Senate election. We know that for certain. It means that the crossbench is key for every single piece of legislation. So I will be advocating as your direct independent representative on the crossbench to ensure that we have 4 senators for the ACT, and on every piece of legislation that everything is analysed from transparency, accountability and integrity, and through the lens of its impact on the whole nation, and in particular for all of us here in the ACT.
But look, so record spending on infrastructure. So 500 million of that is on the Australian War Memorial, a project that is still pretty controversial. Even I was on the Public Works Committee. I can tell you about some of the debates that occurred there. So there is a real issue about making sure that we actually spend infrastructure well, and that we should actually be sharing it right across our national institutions. So there are two things here. One is that when we're spending money on national cultural institutions and infrastructure, that should be regarded as national infrastructure. So it should actually be treated differently. We should actually get additional spending that's allocated to that. And there are some simple ways you could actually fund it too. One of the most obvious ones the ACT government's talked about before is that any of the revenue that's raised by parking in the Parliamentary Triangle should be going back into the infrastructure in the Parliamentary Triangle. It's one example, there are many others. But look, what we really need from whether it's your members in the reps and members in the Senate, it's actually 5 to 10 year plans on infrastructure that we can actually put to our colleagues in federal parliament with the support of an ACT government. That's why I'm committed to, if I'm the member for being after the next election, sitting down with all the major community groups and stakeholders in the space and working that out for being.
I think that's a wrap. So I just wanted to say a quick thank you to all the candidates for coming tonight. It was very enlightening for me. I've never chaired a meeting like this before. I've stayed right away from politics after having a father who served on Cootamundra Community Council for 16 years. So I stayed right out of politics until my children now are a bit older and I can leave the house for night. So this is a bit of a treat. But thank you so much for all your answers, your honesty, and thank you to all your questions.
I'd also like to come in, firstly to thank Monique for jumping into the task that she's never done in her life. We tried to get a few noted journalists around town, but Weston Creek doesn't seem to matter, so we looked after ourselves there, didn't we, Monique? We'll do it again. You've got a permanent gig for this. And also, thanks to the guys who did all the organisation. They've been down there running cameras and live feeds, and we've pulled some great questions in. And thank you for the people here and the people at home. There's a lot of people that zoomed in. We've had 3 or 4 feeds going of people watching and sending a few questions in. The housing questions both came in online, which is great. And it also means the video is available for those who missed out to watch later. And I've got to give my friends at Weston a plug. Weston Community Council is having most of these people back, plus the Canberra people back on Wednesday night to go through it all again. I don't know how they do it. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone.